Let me tell you about the Everly family, about what happened in the autumn of 1869, in a place that no longer exists on any map, a place that was swallowed by the river, by the earth itself, as if the land wanted to forget what transpired there. I know this story because I've spent 15 years piecing it together. 15 years combing through water-damaged journals, interviewing the descendants of survivors, standing on the banks where Everly's Crossing used to be. And I can tell you this, some stories don't want to be told. Some stories fight back. The Everly family arrived in late September, when the Virginia wilderness still held the last warm breath of summer. Thomas Everly, his wife Margaret, and their 3 daughters, Elizabeth, aged 15, Catherine, aged 12, and little Sarah, barely 9 years old. They came from Baltimore, fleeing something, though the records never say what. Some debts, perhaps. Some scandal. The kind of past that makes a man pack his entire life into a wagon and disappear into the frontier. They purchased land along the Rappahannock River, a stretch that locals called the Bend. The river curved there like a sickle, creating a natural peninsula of rich bottomland surrounded on 3 sides by dark water. It was cheap, suspiciously cheap. But Thomas Everly was a man with limited options and unlimited ambition, and he saw only opportunity where others saw warning signs. The house they built was modest, 2 stories, whitewashed wood, with a wide porch that faced the river. From that porch you could hear the water constantly, endlessly, a liquid whisper that never stopped. Margaret Everly mentioned it in her first letter to her sister in Baltimore. The river speaks here, Charlotte. Day and night it speaks. I find it difficult to sleep. The nearest settlement was Whitewood, 5 miles upriver, a timber town of perhaps 200 souls. The locals were cordial but distant. They helped Thomas raise his barn, shared tools, offered advice about the land. But they never stayed past sunset. They never brought their wives or children. And they never, not once, mentioned why the Bend had stood empty for so long. Thomas didn't ask. Men like Thomas Everly don't ask questions when they've finally found a place to start over. The first few weeks were ordinary enough. Thomas cleared land, built fences, prepared for the spring planting. Margaret established her household, fighting a constant battle against the humidity that crept up from the river and made everything damp. The girls explored their new world with the resilience of youth, turning the wilderness into their playground. But it was the girls who heard it first. Elizabeth wrote about it in her diary, a diary I found in an estate sale in Richmond, its pages still smelling of mildew and old secrets. October 3, 1869. Today, while collecting blackberries near the water's edge, I heard someone singing. A woman's voice, I think, though it was difficult to tell. The song had no words, or if it did, they were in a language I didn't recognize. I looked, but saw no one. The voice seemed to come from the river itself. I told Catherine, but she laughed at me, said I was hearing birds or wind. But I know what I heard. And tonight, lying in bed, I hear it again. Faint but there. Always there. Catherine heard it next 2 days later. She was fishing from the old dock that had come with the property, a rickety structure of weathered posts and warped planks that extended 20 feet into the river. She mentioned it casually at dinner, how she'd heard singing while waiting for the catfish to bite. Elizabeth's face went pale. Margaret dismissed it as childish imagination, but her hand trembled as she passed the potatoes. Sarah, the youngest, said nothing, but she had stopped playing near the water. She would stand at the tree line, staring at the river with an expression too old for her face, too knowing. When Margaret asked her what was wrong, Sarah simply said, "They're waiting." "Who's waiting, darling?" "The drowned ones. Children say strange things." Margaret told herself this. Children have dark imaginations. But that night, she stood on the porch after everyone had gone to bed, and she listened, really listened. And beneath the normal sounds of the river, the gurgle and splash, the chorus of frogs, she heard something else. A sound like voices, a sound like singing, a sound like drowning. Thomas noticed nothing, or claimed to notice nothing. He was a practical man, and practical men don't hear phantom voices. But I've read his journal too, found in the same estate sale, separate from his daughter's diary. And in the margins of his farming notes and weather observations, in handwriting that grows increasingly erratic, he wrote, "They won't stop. Why won't they stop?" By mid-October, all three girls heard the voices every day. They would stand at their bedroom window at night, foreheads pressed against the glass, staring down at the river. Sometimes Margaret would find them like that in the morning, still standing, still staring, their nightgowns damp with condensation, or something else. When she asked what they were looking at, Elizabeth would say, "The beautiful ladies." "What ladies?" "In the water. Don't you see them, Mother? They're dancing." But Margaret saw nothing. Nothing but the dark river sliding past in the moonlight, patient and hungry. The people in Whitewood began to avoid them. When Thomas came to town for supplies, conversations would stop. Eyes would follow him. Old Jeremiah Stokes, who ran the general store, finally pulled him aside and asked, "Your girls hearing things yet?" Thomas felt his stomach drop. "What things?" "You know what things. The river things. The singing." Jeremiah's face was grave. "You need to leave that place, Tom. Tonight if you can. Before the river takes them." "Takes them? What are you talking about?" But Jeremiah wouldn't say more, just shook his head and refused to meet Thomas's eyes. As Thomas left the store, he heard Jeremiah whisper to another customer, 6 weeks, maybe less. That's what it took with the Patterson girls. Thomas drove his wagon home faster than he should have, the wheels bouncing dangerously over the rutted road. He arrived to find Margaret in tears on the porch, and the girls standing waist-deep in the river, their dresses billowing around them like funeral shrouds, their faces tilted up to the sky in ecstasy. They were singing, and the river was singing back. Thomas waded into the river fully clothed, the cold water shocking against his skin. He grabbed Elizabeth first, then Catherine, then Sarah, dragging them back to shore despite their protests. They fought him, not with the petulant resistance of children, but with genuine fury, clawing at his hands, screaming words he didn't understand, words that hurt his ears, made his teeth ache. "Let us go back," Elizabeth shrieked. "They need us. They're so alone." He got them inside, all three soaking and shivering, and locked the door. Margaret wrapped them in blankets while Thomas paced, his boots squelching, his mind racing. The girls sat in a row on the settee, their eyes fixed on the window, on the river beyond, their lips moving silently, singing songs without sound. That night, Thomas rode back to Whitewood. He found Jeremiah Stokes in the back room of the general store, doing his accounts by lamplight. The old man looked up as Thomas burst in, and something like pity crossed his face. "Tell me about the Patterson girls," Thomas demanded. Jeremiah closed his ledger slowly. "Tom, you don't want to. Tell me." So Jeremiah told him. The Patterson family had owned the Bend before the Everleys. 5 years ago, they'd come from North Carolina. A father, mother, and 4 daughters aged 7 to 16. Good Christian people, hardworking, decent. They'd bought the land for a song, same as Thomas, and built a house in the exact same spot where the Everly house now stood. "Started about a month in," Jeremiah said, his voice low. "The girls began acting strange, distracted, would wander down to the water at all hours. Said they heard singing, heard voices calling them. Sweet voices, they said. Beautiful voices. Voices that promised them things. What things? Never said exactly, but they became obsessed with the river. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep. Just stood at the windows staring at the water. Their mother tried everything. Prayer, medicine, even locked them in their rooms. Didn't matter. They'd find ways out. Find ways back to the river. Thomas felt his mouth go dry. What happened? January of 65. Dead of winter. The river was frozen solid, or so everyone thought. All 4 girls walked out onto the ice in the middle of the night. Their parents didn't even know they were gone until morning. Jeremiah paused, his hands trembling slightly. The ice broke. All 4 of them went through. They found the bodies 3 days later, caught in the current 2 miles downstream. The room seemed to contract around Thomas. And their parents? Went mad from grief. The father hung himself from their barn rafters. The mother, well, she just walked into the river one night with stones in her pockets. Never came back up. Thomas gripped the edge of the table. Why didn't you tell me this? Why didn't anyone tell me? You think you would have believed it? Jeremiah's eyes were hard now. You think any man believes stories about haunted rivers and cursed land until his own children are standing in the water, singing songs to the drowned? There has to be a rational explanation. Something in the water, maybe. Some kind of contamination that affects the mind. You can believe that if it helps you sleep. But I'll tell you something else. Jeremiah leaned forward. The Pattersons weren't the first. Before them was the Wexler family in 58. 2 daughters. Before that, the Blackwoods in 51. 3 daughters. Every time, same story. Girls hear voices from the river. Girls go into the water. Girls never come back. How many? Thomas whispered. 13 girls total over the last 20 years. All drowned in that bend of the river. All of them heard the singing first. Jeremiah stood, walked to his window, looked out at the darkness. You want to know the oldest part? There's a legend the Monacan Indians used to tell, before the settlers came. They called that place Kaini Wipo. Means, where the water remembers. Remembers what? Depends on who you ask. Some say it's where young women drown themselves during a war, rather than be taken as slaves. Some say it's where a medicine woman cursed the water after her daughters were killed by raiders. Some say it's older than that, older than any human memory. That the river itself is alive there, and hungry, and patient. Thomas wanted to dismiss it all as superstition, but he kept seeing his daughters standing in the water, their faces transformed by something that wasn't quite joy and wasn't quite terror. Something beyond both. What do I do? He asked. Leave. Tonight. Burn the house if you have to. Get your girls as far from that water as possible and never come back. And if I can't? If they won't go? Jeremiah turned to face him, and in the lamplight, his face looked ancient. Then you pray, Tom. Pray that drowning is all the river wants from them. Thomas rode home through darkness so complete it felt solid. The horse was nervous, shying at shadows, fighting the bit. When he crested the ridge overlooking his property, he could see the house below, lit from within by lamplight. And he could see the river, silver in the starlight, coiled around the land like a serpent around its prey. He found Margaret in the kitchen, her face streaked with tears. They won't speak to me, she sobbed. They just sit there, staring at the water, humming those awful songs. Thomas, what's wrong with them? We're leaving. First light. Pack what we need and leave the rest. But the farm, the house, everything none of it matters if we're dead. He told her everything Jeremiah had said. She listened with growing horror, one hand pressed to her mouth. When he finished, she said, we should leave now, not wait for morning. But when they went to the girls' room, they found it empty. The window stood open, curtains billowing in the night breeze. And from outside, drifting up from the river, came the sound of children's voices, singing in harmony with something vast and terrible. Thomas and Margaret ran. Down the stairs, out the door, across the yard. The moonlight showed them their daughters, all 3 standing at the water's edge, their nightgowns glowing white. They were holding hands, swaying slightly, singing a song that made the air itself feel thick and wrong. Elizabeth! Catherine! Sarah! Margaret screamed. The girls turned. Their faces were ecstatic, rapturous. Elizabeth smiled. Mother, come listen. They're telling us such beautiful things. They're showing us such wonderful places. Who is? Who's telling you these things? The drowned ones. The forever swimming ones. The ones who live in the deep places and remember everything. Elizabeth's voice had changed, become layered, as if multiple people were speaking through her at once. They want us to join them. They've been so lonely, Mother. So very lonely for so very long. Thomas grabbed Elizabeth's arm. She was cold, impossibly cold, as if she'd been in the water for hours. You're coming back to the house. All of you. Now. You can't stop us, Catherine said calmly. We'll just come back. We'll always come back. The river calls us. Can't you hear it? Listen. And despite himself, Thomas listened. Beneath the normal river sounds, he heard it. Voices. Hundreds of voices. Thousands. A chorus of the drowned. Singing up from the depths. Singing songs of welcome and invitation and hunger that felt as old as water itself. He dragged his daughters back to the house. They didn't resist physically, but they sang the entire way, their voices growing louder, more confident. By the time he got them inside, the house itself seemed to reverberate with the sound. Pictures rattled on walls. Windows vibrated in their frames. The water in the kitchen basin rippled in concentric circles. They locked the girls in their room and pushed a dresser against the door. For the rest of that night, Thomas and Margaret sat at the kitchen table, holding each other, listening to their daughters sing. And from the river, from the darkness outside, came the sound of something singing back, something vast and patient and utterly inhuman. When dawn finally came, the singing stopped. The silence was somehow worse. Thomas and Margaret didn't sleep. How could they? They sat at the kitchen table as gray light crept through the windows, watching the river transform from silver to gray to brown under the rising sun. The normal sounds of morning, birds, wind, the creak of the house settling, all seemed false now, a thin veneer of normalcy over something fundamentally wrong. At 7, they heard movement from upstairs, the dresser scraping across the floor, the door opening, footsteps on the stairs. The girls appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in their nightgowns, their hair tangled, their feet bare and muddy. They looked exhausted, with dark circles under their eyes that looked like bruises. But they smiled at their parents as if nothing had happened. "Good morning, Mother." "Good morning, Father," Elizabeth said. Her voice was her own again. Normal. Almost normal. "Is there breakfast?" Margaret stared at them, her hands trembling. "Girls, do you remember last night?" "Last night." Catherine tilted her head, genuinely confused. "We went to bed early. I don't remember anything unusual." "You don't remember going to the river? Singing?" All three girls looked at each other, then back at their parents. "We were in our room all night," Sarah said. "Wasn't we?" They seemed sincere, but there was mud on their feet. River mud. Thomas could smell it, that distinctive silt and decay odor of the Rappahannock. He made a decision. "Margaret, pack what we need. We're leaving in an hour." "Leaving?" Elizabeth's face fell. "But Father, why? We just got here. The farm. The farm can rot. We're going." They packed quickly, taking only what would fit in the wagon. Clothes, food, Margaret's sewing kit, Thomas's tools. The girls protested, but weakly, as if they couldn't quite remember why they wanted to stay. As Thomas loaded the wagon, he found himself looking back at the house, at the river beyond it. In the morning light, it all looked so peaceful, so ordinary. Maybe he was overreacting. Maybe it had been some kind of shared hysteria, brought on by stress and exhaustion. Then he saw something in the water, a pale shape, just beneath the surface, keeping pace with the current. It looked like a hand, a woman's hand, fingers trailing, beckoning. He blinked, and it was gone. They were on the road by 9 o'clock. Thomas drove the wagon north toward Whitewood, then east toward Fredericksburg, away from the river, away from the bend. The girls sat in the back, silent and subdued, watching their new home disappear behind them. "Where are we going?" Catherine asked. "Fredericksburg," Thomas said. "We'll stay there until I can find new land, somewhere far from water." They made good time on the first day, covering nearly 20 miles before stopping at a farmhouse to ask permission to camp in their field. The farmer, a German immigrant named Schofield, agreed and even invited them to share dinner. It was the first time in weeks that Thomas felt his shoulders relax, the first time Margaret smiled. That night, sleeping in the wagon under a canopy of stars, Thomas actually allowed himself to believe they'd escaped. Whatever had been affecting the girls, contaminated water, shared delusion, or something darker, it was behind them now. They would start fresh. They would be safe. He woke at midnight to find the wagon empty. "Margaret," He shook his wife awake. The girls! They found them a quarter-mile away, walking across a fallow field in their nightgowns, heading south. Heading back. When Thomas caught up to them, they turned with faces full of such anguish that he almost didn't recognize them. "We have to go back," Elizabeth pleaded. "They're calling us. They need us. Can't you hear them, Father? They're so sad. So alone." Thomas looked around wildly. They were miles from the river now. Miles from the bend. "There's no water here. You can't possibly hear anything." "Water is everywhere," Sarah said softly. "In the ground, in the air, in us. Water remembers. Water connects. And they're calling through it." He carried them back to the wagon, one by one, and this time he tied them down. Gently but firmly, he lashed their wrists to the wagon sides with rope, ignoring their cries and Margaret's protests. "I'm sorry," he said, tears running down his face. "I'm so sorry, but I can't let you go back there. I can't." They didn't sleep the rest of the night. None of them. The girls pulled against their bonds, whimpering, crying, sometimes screaming. And through it all, they sang. That haunting melody, those words in a language Thomas didn't recognize. Mr. Schofield came to investigate the noise, took one look at the scene, and went back to his house without a word. In the morning, he refused payment and asked them to leave immediately. They continued east. Fredericksburg was still a day away, but Thomas pushed hard, barely stopping. The girls had gone quiet now, which was somehow worse than the singing. They sat limply in the wagon, their eyes glazed, their lips moving soundlessly. Margaret tried to feed them, but they wouldn't eat. Tried to give them water, but they wouldn't drink. "Thomas, they're dying," Margaret whispered that afternoon. "Look at them. They're just fading." It was true. In just 2 days away from the river, the girls had taken on a wasted appearance. Their skin had lost its color, becoming pale and slightly translucent. Their hair, once lustrous, hung lank and lifeless. They barely seemed to breathe. That night, camped in a grove of pines, Thomas made another decision. He left Margaret with the girls and rode alone back toward Whitewood. It was a 3-hour ride in darkness, his horse nervous and stumbling, but he had to know more, had to understand what he was fighting. He found the town's small church and pounded on the rectory door until Pastor Hollis answered, bleary-eyed and irritated. But when Thomas explained who he was, what was happening, the pastor's face went grave. "Come in," he said. "I'll tell you what I know." Pastor Hollis had been in Whitewood for 12 years. He'd performed the funerals for the Patterson girls, had tried to counsel their parents before they died. He'd researched the history of the Bend, looking for answers, for some way to help the next family, because he knew there would be a next family. There was always a next family. "The land has been cursed for decades," Hollis said, spreading old maps and journals across his desk. "But the curse goes back further than that. I found records in the Monacan tribal histories, oral traditions recorded by missionaries in the 1730s. They spoke of that bend in the river as a sacred place. Sacred and forbidden. Why forbidden? Because of what happened there. In the time before European contact, there was a village near the bend. Prosperous, peaceful. But one spring, the river flooded catastrophically. The entire village was swept away. Every man, woman, and child. Over 200 people drowned in a single night. Thomas felt a chill run through him. And the voices? The Monacan believed the dead couldn't find their way to the spirit world. They were trapped in the water, suspended between life and death, their spirits bound to the place where they drowned. And they were lonely, desperately, eternally lonely. So they called to the living, especially to young girls, the most sensitive, the most open. They called them to join them in the water, to ease their loneliness. That's just superstition. It can't be. Can't it? Hollis's eyes were hard. You've seen what's happening to your daughters. Every family that's lived on that land has seen the same thing. The girls hear voices. The girls go into the water. The girls drown. That's not superstition, Mr. Everly. That's a pattern. That's evidence. Thomas slumped in his chair. So what do I do? How do I save them? Pastor Hollis pulled out a final journal, this one newer than the others. I've been researching this for years, consulting with colleagues, with historians, with anyone who might know something. And I found only one story of someone who survived the river's call. Who? A girl named Hannah Pritchard. In 1843, she was 11 when her family moved to the Bend. Started hearing the voices, just like your daughters. But her grandmother, a Cherokee woman who'd married into the family, recognized what was happening. She took Hannah away from the river and performed a ritual. A cleansing ceremony. What kind of ceremony? Fire and ash. The Cherokee believed that fire purified, that smoke carried prayers to the spirits. The grandmother built a ceremonial fire and had Hannah sit in the smoke for 3 days and 3 nights, fasting, praying, letting the smoke enter her lungs and cleanse the water's influence from her body. On the 4th day, Hannah couldn't hear the voices anymore. She lived to be 83, married, had children. Never went near that river again. Thomas leaned forward. Did she write down how to perform this ceremony? She told her story to a local historian in 1920. He recorded it. Hollis handed Thomas a page of notes, carefully copied. It's all here. The type of wood to use, the prayers to say, the timing. But Mr. Everly, you need to understand, Hannah Pritchard was one girl, and even that nearly killed her. You have 3 daughters, and they're already much deeper under the river's influence than Hannah was. But it's possible? It's possible. But the ceremony must be done away from the river. Far away. And the girls will resist. They'll fight you with everything they have. The river won't let them go easily. Thomas took the notes, folded them carefully, and put them in his coat pocket. Thank you, Pastor. Mr. Everly? Hollis stopped him at the door. If this doesn't work, if the river has already claimed them too deeply, you may have to make a terrible choice. Better a quick death by your hand than a slow death by drowning, trapped forever in that dark water, calling out for company. Thomas couldn't respond to that. He rode back to his family through the darkness, the pastor's words echoing in his mind. He found the campsite in chaos. Margaret was sitting with her back against a tree, sobbing. The wagon was empty. The ropes were cut. They're gone, Margaret gasped. I untied them to let them eat, and they ran. All 3 of them. Thomas. They ran toward the river. Took him 6 hours to find them. 6 hours of searching by torchlight, following broken branches and disturbed leaves. He found them at dawn, 10 miles south, almost back to Whitewood. They were collapsed in a ravine, too exhausted to go further, huddled together like baby birds fallen from a nest. He carried them back one by one. They were light as paper, barely conscious. This time when he tied them down, they didn't even protest. And Thomas knew they were running out of time. Thomas found an abandoned tobacco barn 30 miles northeast of Fredericksburg. The building was half collapsed, its roof open to the sky in places, but the walls were mostly intact and it was far, far from any significant body of water. The nearest creek was 2 miles away. It would have to do. They moved the girls inside at sunset. Elizabeth, Catherine, and Sarah hadn't spoken in 2 days. They sat slumped in the wagon, their eyes half closed, their breathing shallow. Margaret tried to give them water from a well, not the river, but it dribbled from their mouths. Their bodies were rejecting it, rejecting everything except the call of the Rappahannock. Are they dying? Margaret asked, and Thomas couldn't answer because he didn't know. They looked like dying people. They looked like drowned people, like corpses that hadn't yet realized they were dead. According to Pastor Hollis's notes, the ceremony required 3 days of preparation. Thomas had to gather specific woods, hickory for strength, cedar for purification, oak for endurance. He had to fast and pray, cleanse himself before he could cleanse his daughters. But looking at the girls' gray faces, their cracked lips, their translucent skin, he knew they didn't have 3 days. We're doing this tonight, he told Margaret. Help me build the fire. They worked quickly, stacking wood in the center of the barn's dirt floor. Thomas had never built a ceremonial fire before. He'd never performed any kind of ritual. He was a practical man, a Christian man, who believed in hard work and providence and the rational order of things. But he was also a desperate man, and desperate men will try anything. The notes described a specific pattern, with stacked in a spiral, smallest pieces at the center, larger pieces radiating outward like the spokes of a wheel. As he worked, Thomas whispered the prayers Pastor Hollis had written down. Prayers in Cherokee, which he didn't understand, and prayers in English, which he did. Great Spirit, cleanse this child of water's hold. Fire, purify what water has claimed. Smoke, carry away the voices of the drowned. When the fire was ready, they placed Elizabeth, the oldest, the most affected, beside it. She moaned when they moved her, her head lolling. Her eyes opened, and Thomas saw with horror that they had changed color. Once brown, they now looked gray-green, the color of river water. Elizabeth, sweetheart, can you hear me? Her lips moved. First, no sound came. Then, in a voice that seemed to come from very far away, "They're so angry, Father, so angry that you took us away. They say we promised. They say we belong to them now. You didn't promise them anything. You're sick, and we're going to make you well." "No." Her hand shot out with surprising strength, gripping his wrist. Her skin was cold and slightly damp, like something that had been underwater. "You don't understand. They're not just calling us. They're showing us beautiful things, Father, secret things. The river holds memories. Memories of everyone who ever drowned, everyone who ever died near water, everyone who ever cried tears into its current. We can see them all, know them all, be them all. Elizabeth, that's the sickness talking. It's not sickness." Her voice rose, and with it came something else. A sound like rushing water, like a chorus of drowning voices all speaking at once. "It's truth. It's knowing. You live on the surface of things, Father. You skim across the top of life like a water bug, never going deep, never understanding. But we've been invited into the depths. We've been chosen to remember." Thomas pried her fingers from his wrist. "Light the fire," he told Margaret. The kindling caught quickly, flames racing along the spiral pattern of wood. As the fire grew, Thomas lifted Elizabeth and held her over the smoke. The note said she needed to breathe it in, let it fill her lungs, let it burn away the river's influence. She screamed. It wasn't a child's scream. It was something older, deeper, filled with rage and terror and loss. The sound seemed to shake the barn, sending dust cascading from the rafters. Elizabeth thrashed in Thomas's arms, fighting with impossible strength. Her nails raked his face, drawing blood. Her teeth snapped at his hands. "Hold her," he shouted to Margaret. "Help me hold her." Together they forced Elizabeth down, holding her in the smoke. Her screams became words, the same strange language they'd heard her singing. The fire responded, flames leaping higher, smoke billowing in thick clouds. Thomas's eyes watered. His lungs burned. But he held on, even as Elizabeth convulsed, even as her skin began to steam. The smoke was working. He could see it. See something dark and liquid seeming to evaporate from her pores, rising with the smoke toward the open roof. It looked like water vapor, but it moved wrongly, purposefully, reluctantly. It clung to her before the heat finally drove it away. After 20 minutes, Elizabeth went limp. Thomas pulled her from the smoke, coughing, checking her pulse. It was there, thready but steady. Her eyes were closed. Her breathing had deepened. And when he looked at her skin, it seemed slightly less translucent, slightly more alive. "It's working," Margaret breathed. They had no time to rest. They placed Catherine in the smoke next. She was worse than Elizabeth, more deeply claimed. The moment the smoke touched her, she began to convulse. Her back arched impossibly, vertebrae cracking. Her eyes rolled back until only the whites showed, and those whites looked gray, clouded, like the eyes of a drowned woman. From her mouth came water. Not saliva, not spit. River water. It poured from her lips in an impossible stream, splashing onto the dirt floor, pooling around the fire. The water was cold. Thomas could feel it when it splashed on his hands. And it smelled of silt and decay and old drownings. "Dear God," Margaret whispered. Thomas held Catherine tighter, forcing her to breathe the smoke. More water came. From her mouth, her nose, even her eyes, streaming down her face like tears. The fire hissed where the water hit it, sending up clouds of steam that mixed with the smoke. And in that steam, Thomas saw faces. Dozens of faces. Hundreds. All the drowned of the Rappahannock. All the lost souls trapped in its current. They swirled in the smoke and steam, mouths open in silent screams, hands reaching out. Young faces, old faces, all wearing expressions of eternal longing and rage. "Don't look at them," Pastor Hollis had written. "The drowned will try to claim you too." But Thomas couldn't look away. He saw the Patterson girls, their faces blue and swollen. He saw women in colonial dress, men in Indian garb, children in swaddling clothes. All drowned, all trapped, all desperate for company in their cold eternity. One face came closer than the others, a woman with long dark hair and hollow eyes. She mouthed words at Thomas. "She is ours. They are all ours. We are so alone." Then the smoke shifted, and the faces were gone. Catherine coughed once, violently, expelling a final gout of water. Then she went still. Like Elizabeth, she seemed slightly better, color returning to her cheeks, her breathing easing. Sarah was the youngest, but she was the worst. When they placed her in the smoke, she didn't scream or struggle. She simply smiled, and she spoke in a voice that was not her own. Not one voice, but many voices layered together, speaking in perfect, horrible harmony. "You cannot burn us away. We are in her bones now, in her blood. She is more water than flesh. She is more ours than yours." "No," Thomas said firmly. "She's my daughter, and I'm taking her back." "Taking her back?" The voices laughed, and the sound was like drowning, like choking, like the last breath leaving lungs. "She came to us willingly. She heard our songs and loved them. She saw our kingdom beneath the water and wanted to stay forever. She belongs to the drowned now." Thomas pressed Sarah deeper into the smoke. "Then I'll burn you out of her. Every last trace." What happened next would haunt him for the rest of his life. Sarah's body began to change. Her skin rippled like water, becoming translucent. Thomas could see through her. See her bones, her organs, all of them looking waterlogged and gray. Her hair moved as if underwater, floating around her head in slow, sinuous waves. Her eyes opened, and they were completely black, reflecting nothing, absorbing everything like deep water. "You want to see what we've shown her?" The voices hissed through Sarah's mouth. "You want to know what she knows?" Images flooded Thomas's mind. The Rappahannock River stretching back through time, centuries, millennia. He saw the Monacan village in its final moments, the floodwaters rising, people screaming as the water swept them away. He saw their spirits trapped in the current, spinning endlessly, unable to escape, slowly going mad with loneliness and despair. He saw them learning to call, learning to sing, learning to reach out through the water to the living, seeking company, seeking warmth, seeking an end to their isolation. He saw the families who'd come to the bend over the decades, saw their daughters hearing the songs, saw them walking into the water with smiles on their faces, saw the moment the river closed over their heads, saw them sink down, down into the cold embrace of the drowned, saw them join the chorus, becoming part of the call, luring others to follow. 13 girls, 13 new voices in the eternal song. "Your daughters will make 16, the voices crooned. 3 more sisters for our sisterhood. 3 more voices for our choir. They'll never be lonely again." Isn't that what every parent wants? For their children never to be alone. "Not like this," Thomas gasped, pulling himself back from the vision. "Never like this." He held Sarah in the smoke until his arms went numb. Held her through the voices' threats and pleas and promises. Held her as more water poured from her body, as more faces swirled in the steam, as the fire burned down to coals and had to be rebuilt, stoked higher, made to burn hotter. Dawn was breaking when Sarah finally coughed, blinked, and her eyes returned to their normal blue. The voices fell silent. The water stopped flowing. She looked up at Thomas with her own face, her own expression, and whispered, "Daddy!" Thomas collapsed, exhausted, his clothes soaked with sweat and river water. Margaret gathered Sarah into her arms, weeping. Elizabeth and Catherine lay nearby, breathing peacefully, the color slowly returning to their skin. It had worked. Against all logic, against all probability, it had worked. But as Thomas sat there, watching the sun rise through the barn's broken roof, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching back, something patient, something that could afford to wait. The river had lost this battle, but the river remembered. The river always remembered. They stayed in the abandoned barn for 5 more days. Thomas kept the fire burning constantly, feeding it hickory and cedar and oak, keeping the air thick with cleansing smoke. The girls slept most of that time, a deep, exhausted sleep that seemed to pull them back from wherever they'd been, re-anchoring them to their bodies, to the solid world. Margaret hardly left their sides. She bathed them with water from the distant well, water that Thomas boiled first, as if heat could burn away any trace of the river's influence. She fed them when they woke, simple foods, bread and broth and boiled eggs. At first they couldn't keep anything down, their bodies rejecting sustenance. But gradually, slowly, they began to eat, began to drink, began to return. Elizabeth was the first to truly wake. On the morning of the 3rd day, she opened her eyes with awareness in them, real awareness, not the dreamy, distant look she'd worn for weeks. She saw her father sitting nearby, saw the fire still burning, and began to cry. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "Father, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I couldn't stop myself. They were so beautiful. Their songs were so beautiful, and I wanted so badly to go to them." Thomas held her while she wept. "It wasn't your fault, Elizabeth. You were sick. You're better now. But I remember everything. I remember standing in the water and feeling happy. So happy. Knowing I was going to drown. I remember wanting to drown. What kind of person wants to drown? A person under a dark influence. A person who was poisoned. But you're free of it now." "Am I?" She looked at him with haunted eyes. "I can still hear them sometimes. Very faint, like they're calling from very far away. Do you think I'll always hear them?" Thomas didn't answer. He didn't know what to say. The truth was, he could hear them too now. Ever since the ceremony, ever since those visions in the smoke, he'd been aware of a faint whisper at the edge of his consciousness. A liquid murmur that never quite went away. Catherine woke the next day, and Sarah the day after that. Both remembered. Both were traumatized. Both carried the same haunted look in their eyes. But they were themselves again. Thin, exhausted, aged beyond their years by what they'd experienced, but themselves. On the 6th day, Thomas decided they were strong enough to travel. He'd sold his tools and wagon in Fredericksburg, used the money to buy train tickets. They would go to Richmond, stay with Margaret's sister until he could find work, start over somewhere urban and crowded and far from any significant water. The journey was difficult. The girls were weak, needed to rest often, and they were afraid. Afraid of every stream they crossed, every pond they passed. When they saw the James River from the train window, all 3 began to shake. Sarah vomited. Catherine covered her ears, though there was no sound except the train's rattling progress. "They're everywhere," Elizabeth whispered. "The drowned. Every body of water has them, the people who died there, the spirits who can't move on. I can feel them all, calling, always calling." "Don't listen," Thomas said firmly. "Keep your mind on other things. Think about your aunt's house, about Richmond, about the future." But he wondered, would they ever truly be free? Or had the river marked them permanently, made them sensitive to something most people couldn't perceive? Had it opened a door in them that could never be fully closed? They arrived in Richmond on a gray October afternoon. Margaret's sister Charlotte welcomed them but was shocked by their appearance. Gaunt, hollow-eyed, jumpy. Thomas told her they'd all been very ill, that they needed rest and recovery. It wasn't quite a lie. The girls improved in the city. Surrounded by crowds and buildings and the noise of urban life, they seemed to stabilize. The whispers faded. Their nightmares decreased. Slowly, carefully, they began to resemble normal children again. Thomas found work at a tobacco warehouse. It was hard labor, but it paid enough to rent a small house on the outskirts of the city. Margaret took in sewing. Elizabeth helped her mother, while Catherine and Sarah returned to their studies, trying to make up for the education they'd missed. For 3 months, life approached normalcy. 3 months of peace, of ordinary days, of slow healing. Thomas began to believe they'd truly escaped, that the river had finally let them go. Then the dreams started. All 3 girls began having the same dream. They would find themselves standing on a riverbank. Not the Rappahannock, but a river that looked like all rivers, every river, the platonic ideal of a river. And in the water, women would dance. Beautiful women with long hair and flowing dresses, spinning and twirling in the current. They would call to the girls, beckoning with pale hands. Come swim with us. Come dance with us. Come remember with us. It's just dreams, Thomas said. Dreams can't hurt you. But the dreams grew more vivid, more insistent. The girls would wake screaming, soaked in sweat. Or worse, wake silent and still, staring at nothing, humming those familiar songs. Elizabeth began sleepwalking. Margaret would find her in the night, standing in the backyard, facing east toward the distant Rappahannock, her arms outstretched as if embracing invisible dancers. Catherine started collecting water. She'd fill jars, cups, bowls with water from the well and line them up in her room. They're thirsty, she explained when Margaret found them. The drowned ones are so thirsty. Sarah stopped speaking. She'd open her mouth, but only a sound like gurgling water would come out. It's not over, Margaret told Thomas one night, her voice breaking. Whatever you did, it wasn't enough. They're coming back. The river is calling them back. Thomas knew she was right. He could feel it himself. That pull, that whisper, that constant liquid murmur growing louder each day. The river hadn't forgotten them. The river was patient. And the river wanted what it had been promised. He went to see Pastor Hollis again, riding 2 days to Whitewood. The pastor listened to his story with increasing concern. The ceremony was meant to break the immediate hold, Hollis explained, to save them from drowning. But once the river has touched someone so deeply, once it's shown them what lies beneath, they're marked. They'll always hear the call now, always feel the pull. So what do I do? Keep them locked up forever? Watch them go mad trying to resist? There might be one option. Hollis pulled out another journal, this one even older. The Monacan spoke of a way to permanently sever the connection. But it requires returning to the source. Thomas felt his stomach drop. Return to the river? That's madness. Not just return. Confront. There's a place, the deepest part of the bend, where the current runs strongest. That's the center of the curse. The place where the most drowned are concentrated. If you could go there, at the right time, with the right ritual, you might be able to break their hold completely. Or die trying. Yes, Hollis said simply. Or die trying. But Mr. Everly, without this, your daughters will go mad. They'll walk into the James River or the York River or any water deep enough. The drowned are patient, but they're also relentless. They will eventually reclaim what they think belongs to them. Thomas rode home in darkness, his mind racing. Return to the bend. Face the river directly. It was insane. It was suicide. It was the only option. He told Margaret that night. She wept, raged, begged him to find another way. But in her eyes he could see she knew the truth. Their daughters were dying slowly, being drawn back toward the water inch by inch, day by day. Either they faced the river or they lost them forever. When? Margaret asked. Winter. Pastor Hollis said it must be done when the river is low and slow, when the drowned are dormant. December, maybe January. And what do we tell the girls? Thomas looked toward their daughter's room, where even now he could hear the faint sound of humming. We tell them we're going to set them free, or die together. Over the next weeks, Thomas prepared. He studied Hollis's notes until he had them memorized. He gathered the materials he'd need, not fire this time, but iron. Iron chains, iron nails, iron weights. The Monacan believed iron blocked spiritual influence, could anchor wandering souls, could protect against possession. He would take his daughters back to the bend. He would wade into the deepest water, into the very heart of the curse. And he would challenge the drowned for his daughters' souls. It was a desperate plan, probably a fatal plan. But Thomas Everly had learned something in these terrible months. Sometimes the only way out is through. Sometimes the only way to escape the water is to dive into it. On December 15, 1869, the Everly family boarded a train heading southwest. The girls knew where they were going. Thomas had explained everything. They were terrified but also strangely relieved. "Maybe this will end it," Elizabeth said. "One way or another, maybe this will finally end it." As the train carried them back toward the Rappahannock, toward the bend, toward the place where this nightmare had begun, Thomas sat with his family and prayed. He prayed to a God he wasn't sure was listening. He prayed to whatever powers might oppose the drowned and their endless hunger. And in the back of his mind, beneath his prayers, he could hear it. The river singing, welcoming them home. They arrived at Whitewood 3 days before the winter solstice. The town was locked in the grip of an early cold snap, the Rappahannock edged with shelf ice, the trees stark and black against a gray sky. Thomas rented rooms at the town's only inn, and the locals watched them with knowing, pitying eyes. Word had spread that the Everly family had returned. "Heard you got out," Jeremiah Stokes said when Thomas came to the general store for supplies. "Heard you saved your girls with some kind of Indian ritual. Why in God's name would you come back?" "To finish it," Thomas said. "Finish it?" Jeremiah's laugh was bitter. "You don't finish things with that river, Tom. You just survive them. Or you don't." But Thomas bought what he needed: rope and chains and iron spikes, oil for lanterns, warm clothes, a small boat. Jeremiah watched him gather these things with growing horror. "You're going out there," he said. "Out to the bend. You're going out on the water itself." "I have to. That's suicide. The drowned are strongest in the deep water, Tom. On land you had a chance. But out there, you'll be in their element. They'll pull you down before you can say a prayer." "Maybe," Thomas agreed. "But if I don't try, they'll take my daughters anyway. At least this way we fight back." The night before the confrontation, Thomas couldn't sleep. He stood at the window of their room, looking out at the darkness, toward where he knew the river lay. And he could hear it, that constant whisper, that liquid murmur, louder now that they were close. The girls heard it too. All three sat up in their beds, eyes open but not seeing, humming in harmony with the river's song. Margaret joined him at the window. She'd aged 10 years in the last few months, her hair showing silver, lines etched deep around her eyes and mouth. "Thomas, tell me true. Do you think we'll survive tomorrow?" He wanted to lie, wanted to give her comfort, but they'd been through too much for anything but honesty. "I don't know, but I know we have to try. If we die, if the river takes us all, at least we'll be together." "We're not going to die," Thomas said, though he didn't believe it. "We're going to free our daughters and go home, back to Richmond. We'll find a place nowhere near water. Maybe out west, somewhere dry. Arizona or New Mexico. Somewhere the drowned can never reach." It was a beautiful fantasy. They both knew it was nothing more. Pastor Hollis arrived at dawn. He'd agreed to help, to be their witness, to pull their bodies from the water if things went wrong. He looked at the family gathered in the inn's common room. Thomas grim and determined, Margaret pale but resolute, the three girls thin and ethereal, barely there, and Thomas saw doubt in the pastor's eyes. "It's not too late to reconsider," Hollis said. "Yes, it is," Elizabeth answered. "It was too late the moment we heard the first song." They walked to the bend through morning mist. The path was overgrown now, the house Thomas had built standing empty, its windows dark like blind eyes. No one would ever live there again. The locals were already calling it cursed ground, and they were right. The river looked different in winter, slower, darker, thicker somehow. Ice formed lacy patterns along the banks, and the water had taken on an almost oil-like quality, heavy and sluggish. But Thomas could feel the current beneath, Ancient, patient, hungry. "This is the place," he said, pointing to where the river bent most sharply, where the channel ran deepest. "This is where we do it." He'd brought everything according to the ritual Hollis had found. Iron chains to bind, salt to purify, prayers in Cherokee and English and Latin. The theory was simple. He would take his daughters into the deep water, to the very heart of the drowning place. There, he would challenge the spirits directly, offer them a bargain. Release his daughters, and he would ensure the bend was never inhabited again. He would have the land officially cursed, posted with warnings, protected by law. No more families. No more daughters. The drowned would remain alone, but they would also be left in peace. It was a terrible bargain, but it was all he had to offer. They prepared the boat, a small rowboat borrowed from a local fisherman. Thomas loaded the chains, the iron implements, the sealed jar containing 3 iron nails blessed by Pastor Hollis. The girls climbed in silently, their movements dreamlike. They'd been getting worse all morning, the river's proximity pulling them deeper under its influence. "Father," Catherine whispered. "They're so excited. They know we're here. They're waiting." "Let them wait," Thomas said grimly. Margaret insisted on coming. "If you're going into that water, I'm going with you. We face this together." So the 5 of them crowded into the small boat while Pastor Hollis stood on the shore, his Bible clutched in both hands, his lips moving in constant prayer. Thomas pushed off from the bank, took up the oars, and rowed toward the center of the channel. The current caught them immediately. It was stronger than it looked, pulling the boat downstream, spinning it. Thomas fought against it, angling toward the deepest part of the bend. The water here was dark. Not the clear brown of a normal river, but an opaque darkness that seemed to absorb light. He couldn't see more than a few inches below the surface. "We're over it," Sarah said suddenly. "The drowning place. Right here. This is where they all went down." Thomas shipped the oars and let the boat drift. The current held them in place, spinning slowly, a natural eddy that kept them hovering over the deepest water. He could feel it beneath him, something vast and aware, something that was watching, waiting, judging. He took the first iron chain and wrapped it around Elizabeth's waist. "This is to anchor you," he explained, "to keep you connected to the living world, to us. Don't let go of it, no matter what happens." He did the same for Catherine and Sarah, then wrapped chains around his own waist and Margaret's, connecting them all together. They were literally bound to each other now, a circle of iron and flesh. "Ready?" he asked. The girls nodded. Margaret gripped his hand. Thomas began to pray. The words came from Hollis's notes, ancient words that hurt his throat to speak. As he prayed, he opened the jar and dropped the 3 blessed nails into the water. They sank quickly, disappearing into the darkness below. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the water began to glow. A pale, sickly phosphorescence rose from the depths, illuminating the river from beneath. And in that glow, Thomas saw them, the drowned. Hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, standing on the river bottom, looking up. Their faces were pale and bloated, their hair waving like water weeds, their clothes rotted away to tatters. They stood in crowds, in clusters, packed together in the deepest places. The chain around Elizabeth's waist went taut, nearly pulling Thomas overboard. He braced himself, gripping the side of the boat, feeling the iron links bite into his own waist as his daughter's weight pulled from below. The boat tilted dangerously, water rushing over the sides. "Pull her up," Margaret screamed. "Thomas, pull her up." But before he could move, Catherine and Sarah jumped too. The combined weight was too much. The boat capsized, spilling them all into the dark water. Thomas went under, the cold shocking the breath from his lungs. He thrashed, disoriented, pulled down by the chains, by his daughter's weight. His head broke the surface and he gasped, searching frantically. Margaret! She was beside him, clinging to the overturned boat. But the girls were sinking, their white dresses billowing around them as they descended. And they weren't struggling. They were letting themselves fall, their faces serene, their arms spread wide like wings. Thomas dove after them. The water was impossibly cold, impossibly dark. But that strange phosphorescence remained, showing him the way down. He followed the chains, pulling himself deeper, his lungs already burning. He could see Elizabeth below him, her hair streaming upward, her eyes closed, a small smile on her lips. He reached her, grabbed her arm, and pulled. But she wouldn't rise. She was too heavy, or he was too weak, or the current was too strong. He pulled harder, his vision darkening at the edges, his need for air becoming desperate. Then he felt hands on his legs. Looking down, he saw them, the drowned, dozens of them, climbing up the chains, using his body as a ladder, reaching for his daughters. Their faces were eager, hungry, hopeful. They pulled at his clothes, his legs, trying to drag him down with them. Thomas kicked at them, but it was like kicking water. They flowed around his resistance, reforming, always climbing. One of them, a young woman with half her face gone to decay, reached past him and touched Elizabeth's hand. Elizabeth's eyes opened, meeting the drowned woman's gaze, and Thomas saw recognition there. Understanding. Welcome. No, he wouldn't allow this. He'd come too far, sacrificed too much. He would not lose his daughters to the river's hunger. With his last strength, Thomas pulled the iron spikes from his belt, the ones blessed by Pastor Hollis, the ones meant to anchor wandering spirits. He drove one through the chain holding Elizabeth, pinning it to what? There was no ground here, just water. But the spike caught on something, some fabric of reality beneath the physical, and it held. It held Elizabeth suspended, unable to sink further. He did the same for Catherine, then Sarah, driving iron spikes through their chains, pinning them in place. The drowned recoiled from the blessed iron, their hands smoking where they touched the metal. They fell back, swirling around the girls but unable to reach them now. Thomas's lungs were screaming. His vision was going black. But he'd done it. He'd stopped them from sinking, stopped them from joining the drowned. He kicked for the surface, his muscles barely responding, his body shutting down from cold and oxygen deprivation. Up, 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 the light growing brighter, his chest burning, his throat convulsing. His head broke the surface and he gasped, pulling in air that felt like fire. Margaret was there, grabbing him, pulling him to the overturned boat. On the shore, Pastor Hollis was wading in, fully clothed, his face frantic. "The girls!" Margaret sobbed. "Where are the girls?" Thomas could only point down. The chains stretched beneath them, taut, holding his daughters suspended in the deep water. Still alive, the chains connected to his own body, and he could feel their heartbeats through the iron links, but unreachable. Trapped between worlds. Hollis reached them, helped Thomas grab the chains. Together, the three adults pulled. Slowly, agonizingly, the girls began to rise. Thomas could see them now through the murky water, three pale shapes, suspended, unmoving. Were they breathing? Were they drowning? He couldn't tell, couldn't know, could only pull and pray and curse himself for ever bringing his family to this cursed place. It took 20 minutes to pull them up. 20 minutes of fighting the current, fighting the weight, fighting the cold that made their hands numb and their muscles shake. But finally, Elizabeth's head broke the surface, then Catherine's, then Sarah's. They weren't breathing. No, no, no. Thomas hauled Elizabeth to shore, laid her on the frozen ground. Her lips were blue, her skin gray. No pulse, no breath, drowned. He pressed on her chest, trying to remember the techniques he'd seen used on drowning victims. Water poured from her mouth, but she didn't breathe. Margaret was doing the same for Catherine, Hollis for Sarah, all three of them working frantically, desperately, refusing to accept what their eyes told them. "Breathe!" Thomas shouted at his daughter. "Elizabeth, breathe!" Nothing. He pressed harder, faster, his hands shaking, tears streaming down his face. He'd failed. After everything, after fighting so hard, he'd failed. The river had won. The drowned had claimed their due. Then Elizabeth coughed. Water exploded from her mouth, a torrent of it, impossibly more water than her small body could have held. She rolled onto her side, retching, expelling what seemed like gallons of dark river water. And with the water came something else. Something that looked like shadow, like smoke, like the essence of drowning itself. Catherine and Sarah coughed next, both simultaneously, both expelling the same impossible amounts of water and shadow. The darkness that came out of them writhed on the frozen ground for a moment, trying to flow back toward the river. But the iron chains around their waists held it, burned it, prevented it from returning to its source. The shadow water hissed and steamed and finally evaporated, leaving only stains on the frozen ground. The girls gasped, their eyes flying open. They looked at their parents, at Pastor Hollis, at the overturned boat and the dark river beyond. And for the first time in months, their eyes were clear, truly clear. "Father!" Elizabeth's voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. "Is it over?" Thomas gathered her into his arms, holding her so tightly she gasped. "Yes, yes, sweetheart. It's over." But even as he said it, he felt something shift. A change in the air, in the light, in the very quality of reality around them. He looked at the river and saw it had stopped moving. The current had ceased entirely. The water was perfectly still, like glass, like ice, like a mirror reflecting nothing. Then the surface began to rise. Not waves, not ripples. The entire surface of the river rose upward, a wall of water that defied gravity and physics and reason. It rose 10 feet, 20 feet, towering over them on the shore. And in the water, Thomas could see faces, all the drowned, all the lonely dead, pressed against the surface like prisoners against a window. They were furious. "You have broken the covenant," a voice said. Not from the water, but through it, resonating in Thomas's bones, in his teeth. "You have taken what was promised. You have stolen our sisters from us. They were never yours to take." Thomas shouted back, standing despite his exhaustion, despite his terror, putting himself between his daughters and the impossible wall of water. "They're my children, living children. You have no claim on them. They heard our songs. They came to our water. They wanted to join us. They were sick. You poisoned them with your loneliness, your hunger. But I've freed them. I've broken your hold. And you will never touch them again." The wall of water trembled. Thomas could feel the rage behind it, the terrible desire to crash down and crush them all, to drag them into the depths and hold them there forever. One word from whatever consciousness controlled the drowned, one moment of fury overcoming cunning, and they would all die. But Pastor Hollis stepped forward, his Bible raised. "In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, I command you to recede. These souls are not yours. Return to your rest and trouble the living no more." The water trembled again but didn't fall. The faces pressed against its surface twisted with longing and anger and something that looked almost like fear. "You cannot banish us," the voice said, quieter now. "We are not demons to be exorcised. We are victims. We are the forgotten. We are the lonely dead who only want company in our cold eternity. Is that so wrong? Is that so evil?" And despite everything, despite all the horror, Thomas felt a twist of pity, because he understood now what they were. Not monsters, not evil spirits, just souls who died terrified and alone, who'd been trapped by circumstance and tragedy, who'd reached out the only way they knew how, seeking comfort in an eternity of isolation. But understanding wasn't forgiveness, and pity wasn't surrender. "I will make you a promise," Thomas said. "I will ensure this place is sanctified. I'll have Pastor Hollis bless every inch of this land. I'll have it declared holy ground, protected, left alone forever. No more families will come here. No more daughters will hear your songs. You'll be left in peace, true peace, with no one to tempt, no one to call. Let my daughters go. Release them completely, and I swear this will be your sanctuary." The wall of water stood motionless for a long moment. Thomas could feel the drowned considering, debating among themselves. Their hunger fought with their exhaustion. Their loneliness fought with their hope for genuine peace. Finally, the voice spoke again. "Swear it on your soul. Swear that this place will remain untouched, that we will be remembered but left alone." "I swear it," Thomas said, "on my soul and my daughters' lives." This place will remain sacred. I'll have a monument erected, a marker that tells your story. The dead of the Monacan village, the victims of the flood, you'll be remembered. But the living will stay away. The water began to lower. Slowly, incrementally, it sank back toward its natural level. As it descended, the faces faded, becoming less distinct, less present. The anger drained from them, replaced by something that looked almost like relief. "Remember us?" The voice whispered, barely audible now. "We were people once. We loved and hoped and dreamed. Remember that we existed." "I will," Thomas promised. "I will." The water settled back into its natural course, the current resuming its normal flow. The river looked ordinary again. Just water, just a river, the terrible awareness gone from it. The girls' chains went slack, no longer pulling, no longer connecting them to anything beneath the surface. Thomas removed the chains carefully, gently, as if his daughters were made of glass. They sat on the frozen ground, wrapped in blankets that Hollis had brought from shore, shivering but alive. Truly alive. "Can you still hear them?" Thomas asked Elizabeth. She listened, her head tilted, her expression distant. Then she smiled. A real smile. The first genuine smile Thomas had seen on her face in months. "No," she said. "Nothing. Just the river. Just water flowing. It's over, Father. They're really gone." Thomas felt something break inside him. The tension he'd been carrying, the fear, the desperate determination. He collapsed onto the frozen ground beside his daughters and wept. Margaret joined him. Then the girls, all of them crying together, releasing months of accumulated horror and trauma. Pastor Hollis stood guard, his Bible still open, his eyes scanning the river. But the water flowed peacefully now, innocent, as if nothing had ever been wrong with it. They left the bend that afternoon and never returned. True to his word, Thomas petitioned the county to have the land declared a memorial site. He paid for a stone marker to be erected, commemorating the Monacan dead of the Great Flood. May they rest in peace and never be forgotten. The house stood empty for a few years before burning down in a fire of mysterious origin. The land returned to wilderness, the forest reclaiming it. And though the river still flowed past the bend, still curved like a sickle through the Virginia wilderness, no one ever heard singing there again. The Everly family moved to Arizona territory, as far from water as Thomas could manage. He became a surveyor, mapping the desert, measuring distance under endless sky. The girls grew up, married, had children of their own. They never spoke of what happened at the bend, not even to each other. It was an unspoken agreement, a chapter closed, sealed, locked away in the deepest parts of their memories. But sometimes, on quiet nights, Elizabeth would wake from dreams she couldn't quite remember, dreams of dancing in deep water, dreams of songs sung in languages older than words. And she would go to her window and stare out at the darkness, listening, just listening, making sure the silence remained unbroken.